Hello and welcome to the Base Creates podcast. We are a new production company founded by Oliver Bennett and Morgan Watkins. Our mission is to rediscover, explore and reinvigorate great texts in the Western canon, to challenge the conformity of the contemporary dramatic arts. We've done several readings now in which we've brought to life profound texts with responses from new, interesting thinkers. We believe drama needs to go deeper and challenge audiences in order to do justice to our fascinating and troubling modern world. The Base Creates celebrates excellence, depth and vitality. So, today we are going to be speaking to Dominic Frisby, writer and performer. Just to give a little bit of background about Dominic, he has written numerous books about economic philosophy, actually. He runs a very popular Substack about finance and markets, and he's also an incredibly experienced actor and comedian who has quite recently made lots of very funny viral videos. We actually met Dominic. You got in contact with us when you heard about what we were doing, what we were trying to build, and then we were lucky enough to include you in the cast for our most recent reading of Markovsky's The Bedbug, where you gave a show-stopping performance as Oleg Bayan. It was wonderful. So just to start us off, Dominic, can you tell us a little bit about your background in the arts, how you got involved, your experience within the arts?
Yes, certainly. And what a pleasure it was to do that play. You said very early on that the playwright encouraged people to rewrite and modernise his stuff. And so I took that principle and ran and put in jokes wherever possible. My background, my dad was a fairly well-known writer, performer, and by the name of Terence Frisby, who wrote, among other things, a play called There's a Girl in My Soup, which is the longest running comedy in the history of the West End back in the 1960s, made into a film with Peter Sellers and Goldie Hawn, and he wrote ITV's most successful sitcom of the 70s and of the 80s. And one of the sitcoms he wrote was it starred David Jason, but it kind of became the template for Only Fools and Horses, and about two brothers in southeast London. And so I've had the theatre shoved down my throat from a very early age. And my dad loved the theatre. He died in 2020 and he was still going to the theatre 2 or 3 times a week, right up to within a month of his dying. He never stopped loving it. He would go and he would be infuriated by stuff that he thought was crap, and he would be inspired by stuff that he thought was brilliant. And we used to argue about it endlessly. I've actually sort of softened a bit in recent years, but I just reached this point where I just thought theatre had long since disappeared up its backside. It wasn't producing anything of relevance. It was just irrelevant and academic and now I would say wokey, but it wasn't. I mean, it's always been wokey, whatever woke means. And I just became really disillusioned with it, and I thought it was really, really overpriced, and it was no longer a relevant medium. And I became a stand-up comic in the late 1990s, and I was always a big champion of stand-up comedy because I thought it was much more relevant. And I'll give you an interesting example of why I think stand-up comedy took over from theatre. So when my dad was learning his trade in the 50s, he went around all the repertory companies and he would do weekly rep, and he would have a season in Penzance and a season somewhere and a season.
He was acting in rep, your dad?
Yeah.
Right, okay.
And he went to Central School of Drama and became an actor, and then Judi Dench was in his class at drama school. And they stayed friends. She wrote me a very nice letter after he died. And so the old theatres were the main form of entertainment in the 50s and gradually got killed off by telly. By the time of the 90s, repertory theatres, there was only my dad was always saying, go and get a job in rep and learn your trade, learn the craft. And there just weren't the repertory theatres to do that. And what had happened is that because rep was dying and theatre generally was dying, and there was a lot of socialist governments in the post-war era, more and more people started effectively demanding that the government bail them out, subsidies for the arts. And so many people say that subsidies saved the arts, but in my opinion, it killed it. Now, live stand-up at one point was the only live art form that survived on its own 2 feet by its own merits. It was the only art form that required no subsidy to stay afloat. And in order to stay, it had to make itself really commercial. And if you look at the evolution of theatre, so I wrote this film, well, it started as a lecture, it became a film all about the history of the Edinburgh Festival. And I looked at this production that on the Edinburgh Fringe that happened in the early 1950s of the Spanish tragedy done by Edinburgh students. Mm-hmm. And you looked at the stage, and there were 17 actors on the stage, along with a really nice set, and they all had really nice costumes and all the rest of it. And this was a production done by Edinburgh students. And you just thought, to put on a production like that, to build the set, to pay all those actors, to put them all in costumes, to get them all accommodation, to give them all food, everything, just costs an absolute fortune. Mm-hmm. And the economics of theatre was such that over the course of the 1970s, you saw the emergence of a new kind of show, which was the one-man show. Mm-hmm. And these became very popular. And the next obvious evolution of the one-man show was stand-up, which is, in many ways, it's the most naked, purest form of live entertainment that there is, in that it's just one person and a mic. And there's no costume, there's nothing. So it's just dirt cheap to put on. Mm-hmm. But one of the reasons, therefore, that stand-up emerged and became so big was that it was cheap to put on. But the other thing that stand-up had to do, if it was going to survive, was make itself relevant. And so you had comedians just talking about really, really relevant stuff. Whereas for theatre to survive, it needed subsidy. So it no longer was putting on shows that appealed to its audience. It was putting on shows that appealed to the person from the Arts Council who was handing out the subsidy. And they're two very different things. Yes. You know, the guy from the Arts Council is you're in the world of technocrats. He thinks he knows what people want to see, or he thinks or she thinks they know what people should see, rather than market forces. Now, if I take a very, very easy analogy, if you look at the difference between, say, the BBC and YouTube. Now, the BBC is, what gets put on the BBC is decided by the commissioners and the channel controllers and all the rest of it, who a lot of the time think they know what you should be watching. And so what tends to happen is it becomes very politicised. And given that the Arts Council, the right tend not to believe in subsidies and the left tend to believe in subsidies. So people who work in subsidy and the Arts Council tend to be of the left. So the whole thing just gets politicised inevitably. Mm. So the BBC, you've got a commissioner who decides what you should want. Whereas YouTube is completely determined by what people click on, by what audiences want to see. And so if I'd gone to a BBC commissioner 20 years ago and I've got this really good idea for a 1-minute TV programme, and all you do is you show videos of cats or you show videos of babies, the commissioner's going to go, no, I want a programme, a proper programme. But I think that videos of cats are the most watched videos on YouTube. I don't know I think the single most watched genre is actually instructional stuff, educational stuff. But after that, it's cat videos. And so cat videos and the emergence of cat videos, it's totally market driven. And I think that to an extent has happened with live stand-up. But theatre, it hasn't happened.
I mean, it's fascinating. It's just straight into the issues that we really wanted to talk about. So you're saying, because things change, like repertory theatre was not particularly profitable anymore, so the state felt it had to intervene in order to fund it. And there's an obvious difference, isn't there, between stand-up and theatre, as in theatre generally requires more money.
Yeah.
As someone who's tried to put on theatre and put on shows, as well as the rent of the space, you've got, as you said,
it's a much bigger undertaking.
It's a big
not just
thing.
More money, it's more everything. You need rehearsal. Like the stand-up brings his act.
But you're saying that there is
theatre, you need to rehearse the whole thing in.
But your argument is that there is no space, there is no way at all that the state should prop up or help to support that. Because I would put to you, just play devil's advocate here, one of the early proponents of the free market model, Hayek, apparently he said the state should only support 3 things: the police, the army, and opera.
Oh, did he?
In conversation.
He must
apparently.
have been joking.
Well, he was from Vienna, so where it was very, had a very good state opera. But is it your position that there is no space in your view for the state funding a a repertory theatre, but that's kind of what the National does, right? It tries to bring back a kind of rep theatre where it has like gymnasiums, it runs classes, and the state sees its role as to fulfil the excellence there. But you say no, not at all.
I'm pretty absolutist about it. And my father and I just used to argue and argue and argue about it. And I go out for these dinners with my dad's old friends every now and then, and they all believe in subsidy for the arts.
Okay, your dad would argue from the other side.
Oh, my dad, his first play called The Subtopians was put on with an Arts Council subsidy, and he ascribes his entire success and his entire change of career to the fact that the Arts Council subsidy put on his play at the Guildford Theatre.
Okay, so can I I want to work this through from the 50s if we can.
Yeah.
Right. So your dad, which is quite an incredible fact that he trained at and then he did rep. When did he start? When did he leave acting, and when did he start writing? And when did subsidy become? When did theatre need subsidy? Did it ever kind of finance itself by audiences? And when did that change? When did they stop being able to make profit? And when did it have to rely on subsidies? How did that happen?
I don't know the exact history, right, but I'm going to guess, and I'm going to say the first problem the theatre had was TV, okay, the rise of TV, which kind of came around in the post-war. Really, it was in the 50s that everyone started getting their first TVs. And it also struggled against cinema, but that was earlier. In a way, theatre has always had subsidy because it's had patronage, but I don't think they're quite the same. But so, the Crown was Shakespeare's patron, so it was a lot of the time it was Crown money that put on Shakespeare's plays. And I suppose you could argue that it was the subsidy of the day, but I just think patronage and subsidy are two quite different things, because patronage relies on the decision of one individual. And, you guys are looking for funding for your project. You need a patron. Yeah. Crowdfunder and all that is a sort of form of patronage, whereas subsidy is the taxpayer paying for it. And it's a state thing. And so I would distinguish between the two. And I think subsidy for the arts, I mean, it will have existed before the war, but I'm pretty certain it came in the post-war era, the welfare state, the Labour government post-war, and I'm pretty sure it started to spread through then. And the National Theatre itself was only built in the late 60s, I want to say. And the Royal Shakespeare Company is earlier, but again, the clue is in Royal Shakespeare Company, so it must have been a royal thing at some point. And I don't believe the Crown gives it any money now. I don't know. I think its funding comes from the state and also from private backers. The National and the RSC all have a lot of private backers, as well as state subsidy and corporate sponsors and all the rest of it. And in fact, it has to be very careful who it uses as a corporate sponsor, because as we've seen recently with Baillie Gifford, which is a large fund management firm that has I think it's done something wrong. Maybe it's supported Israel in a post on a blog or something. But for example, the Hay Literary Festival, Baillie Gifford was one of the sponsors of the Hay Literary Festival, and then loads of people boycotted the Hay Literary Festival because of its links to Baillie Gifford. So they all have to be a bit careful about who they take their subsidy from, and this is one of my complaints. The whole thing is just so politicized that gets in the way of the creative process.
How does a private patronage model become less politicized? Isn't it just that we're in a very politicized age and everything will be politicized?
Yeah, but if it's private, like if you go, I want to put on, for want of a better word, I want to put on plays that promote Bitcoin. Okay, and so I get a sponsorship from a Bitcoin millionaire. What's the problem with that? That is between me and the Bitcoin millionaire and what he wants to do with his money and the plays that I want to write. It's like an employee kind of relationship. Whereas if I go, I want to get put on plays about some issue, and let's say Bitcoin again, just use Bitcoin. If I want to put on plays about Bitcoin, well, why should the taxpayer pay for that? Why should the state pay for that? And and if you look at, I haven't even studied the National Theatre's output in recent years, but I imagine, it puts on a lot of plays about, for example, Black Lives Matter. Now, a lot of people will support Black Lives Matter. A lot of people think it was a bent organisation and, the founders stole the money from the organisation and it's corrupt. It has its champions and it has its detractors. But with state subsidy, everyone pays for it, whether you're a champion or a detractor. And that, I don't like that. If a guy comes along and goes, I want to champion Black lives and I've earned this much money and I want to put my money into the thing, and somebody else wants to go, I want to write plays about Black Lives Matter or whatever, then fine, go for it. But it's when it's the state and it's everyone that pays for it, that's when I have an objection.
And what would be the sort of fair way of doing it? Would you say, right, if we're going to have a subsidy model, you'd have some plays would be sort of pro BLM or pro whatever the cause would be, but you'd have to balance it out so you have some plays representing like a sort of conservative.
I would argue that if there was no subsidy at all, then what you've just described, a balanced output, would happen quite organically by natural market forces. Whereas at the moment with subsidy, you just have everything is the whole of theatre is skewed to one left of centre worldview, and it's totally biased. And in order to get on in that world, you either have to champion that point of view, and if you don't agree with it, you keep stum, because otherwise you get cancelled. It's biased.
I hear it. This seems to be one of the big problems with conservative thinking in general, is that they're not political necessarily in their nature. They don't being the people, or someone with the people on the left maybe have like a kind of, their way of thinking, their way of doing is structural, is political. So that's how they operate. Whereas people on the right can't quite work out how to kind of combat that properly.
That is a major problem, because the left, I'm using these words very broad brushstroke way, but for one of a better, I mean, even the concept of left and right, in my view, is outdated and wrong, and I see things through an authoritarian and libertarian perspective. But in any case, the left control the cultural institutions.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
and that's the sort of split that we have in power, which is why it's hard to map who's in power.
The left are better at it than the right are. The right are crap at it because the right's instinct is to do things on their own 2 feet.
If you had the patronage model, wouldn't you have? Would it skew rights, or do you think you'd
depends
have
who the patrons are?
Yeah, you might have like George Soros funding some, and then Peter Thiel funding.
Exactly, and which is fine in my opinion because it's more balanced.
Right. Okay.
But theatre will go on being irrelevant as long as its paymaster remains subsidy rather than the audience.
Yeah, and it's fascinating that point.
I think, cool.
When Don was saying that they had to, in order to get the subsidy, you have to kind of sing from the right hymn sheet. So they go, yeah, okay, great, we'll give you this. Which is obviously when people find that when they're applying for the Arts Council.
As anyone who's been through that process.
And you have to fill in all these forms, and people are like, people lie on those forms in order to justify. They think, I better up the diversity thing, or I better up whatever it is, find some victimhood of some kind in order to get the subsidy.
Even on our level, we get people...
That's the problem with free markets champion get up and go and dynamism and vitality, whereas subsidy champions victimhood. And it's the right. If you're an impresario trying to put stuff on, you can't be a victim. You've got to get up and go.
It does. It encourage, and now it's got to such a kind of level that it's almost like sort of unbearable at times. You're sort of filling these things out, and you're thinking, what happened to story and narrative and character, and just like the artistic spirit of freedom and exploration and kind of provocation, which is it feels so stupid to me now. It's so over. It's gone on for so long now that you're just like. I mean, it probably started early on, but then I suppose with the kind of this interesting shift where you've gone from like class and economics to identity and power, which seems to have sort of happened, doesn't it, on the left? It's shifted to an even stranger place.
Identity is the new class.
Identity is new class, and obviously identity is a kind of complicated thing, which doesn't always, someone can come from a working class Pakistani background or a privately educated Indian background, and they could play the same kind of game of like, I'm from this kind of group. But we all know that.
I see that happening in TV comedy.
There
are literally like top, the equivalent of being countess and aristocrats from Southeast Asia getting on telly in the name of diversity.
I know. It's terrible. I used to know people that were like had incredible educations, like Eton, and who were black, and they'd say, oh, they kind of use this thing, and I'd say, but I'd also know people from like really really rough backgrounds who were black, and I'd be like, well, it's not the same thing, it's not just the same experience. Now I wouldn't like discriminate against a person necessarily from a rich background if they've got great ideas and they're great creatives. I feel like fine. But I just don't like the weaponization.
I think everyone just uses, no, nor do I, but everyone uses whatever they've got to get on. It's a very difficult business, the entertainment industry, and if suddenly, there's more jobs for, disabled women, everyone who is a disabled woman is going to champion their disability or make a thing of their disability in order to get the extra. You use whatever you've got, and that's the natural thing. The irony of stand-up, and why I think it's a beautiful thing, is that, like, when I was at drama school, we were taught I think it made a big mistake. It was a fundamental mistake in the way drama acting was taught, but we were taught not to be ourselves. You were taught to get rid of your accent, get rid of your individual quirks, get rid of anything individual about you, and become this blank canvas onto which your character would then be created. But in fact, if you look at, every big star in Hollywood, they're all really, really individual. If you see that Robert De Niro's in a film, or Sean Connery's in a film, or whoever's in a film, you pretty much know, or Jimmy Stewart or Cary Grant or Hugh Grant or whatever, you see that they're in a film, and you're going to get, what performance you're going to get.
Most of the time, yeah.
And so I think that was a big mistake at drama school. But in stand-up, what's quite interesting, and it's that it was actually good to have something, in inverted commas, wrong with you. Like Peter Graham, who runs the King's Head, which is London's oldest comedy club, he used to say, if you've got a really strong regional accent, it would give you a 15% head start on somebody that just has ordinary standard English, because it gives you a unique sound. And similarly, let's say you have a disability, or you're from an unusual ethnicity or something, it's an advantage in stand-up because it gives you something to talk about, and it gives you a hook to hang your act on. And so, again, and this is in a world where there's no affirmative action at the grassroots level, it actually pays. Do you see what I mean? So you don't need government intervention to sort of help certain groups in stand-up. Right. It happens naturally.
So you're saying even within the logic of levelling up the playing field, even, like, this model is actually better at doing that.
It happens naturally, rather than by intervention.
Yeah, what's quite interesting about now is that because obviously Starmer's got in with Labour, that excuse for almost everything the Tories
that's gone.
That's gone, and that's kind of an interesting situation, isn't it? Because sometimes I've just been like, people have been saying that. I'm like, you can't blame your entire existence, all the problems of your existence, on the Tories.
I know.
It's so pathetic. It's so stupid. Why would you give them even that much credit? But we're now into a new era, so it'd be very interesting to see how this interacts with art.
I'm going to be with the detached amusement of a psychopath. I'm going to enjoy watching the creeping sense of disappointment and disillusionment that's going to grow over the next few years when they realise that government is not the answer.
Right. Okay. This is interesting. Yeah. So, okay. So this subsidy thing. So would you say the BBC? Would you compare the BBC to this? Is that a sort of subsidy model? I suppose we have to pay our.
It's 100% that model.
Yeah. So we give these license fees every year, and it's not meritocratically financially rewarded, is it? It's not like, right, if you go to a DVD shop or you go to a cinema, the people keep buying Top Gun because it's good, they like it, therefore the company goes, right, we're going to make the team that have made this are great, we're going to give them more money because they've got some sort of formula, and so there's a reward system there that's based upon the kind of viewer audience with the product. But when you cut that out and there's no sort of meritocratic financial line, you just have like boards and organizations saying we're going to take their money and we're going to give them what we know is best for them, something like that, right?
Yeah, well, that happens. It's the commissioner and the channel heads who, I mean, they base their decisions on what audiences watch. But it is the commissioner and the channel head that determine what you watch, not so much the market. And the BBC model is broken. It's hemorrhaging viewers. It's been hemorrhaging viewers for years. But also, the BBC used to be one of the most trusted in organisations in the world. Everywhere around the world, people would turn to the BBC World Service because they knew they could trust it. And I'm afraid maybe the BBC World Service is still trusted, but at home the BBC is no longer trusted as a source of news, particularly about politics, because it's been so politicised and it's populated, broadly speaking, by people who have that left of centre worldview. And even if they try and be independent journalists, their politics get in the way. But you look at something like BBC Comedy, like. I think live stand-up comedy, it's going through a bit of a recession at the moment, but I would call it a healthy Schumpeterian bit of creative destruction. It needed post-COVID, it just needed a sort of bit of a washout. And it's a ruthless world. But TV comedy is dire. It's just dire.
I'm in some of it.
It's just awful. And you're like, there's no joke there. You've just said an opinion. There is no joke. All you've done is say an opinion. And it's like, I would dream of getting my songs onto Radio 4, because I know that audience would love me. I've got the intellect and I've got the voice, as I always say, for Radio 4. And I just know, and every time they have the offers around, I put in an offer and it doesn't even get past the first. Like you do the thing where you put in like a 60-word offer and it doesn't even pass that. And I did this show in December, okay, and the head of commissioning from Radio 4 came to the show, and it was a show with my band, and Liz Truss was in the audience, okay, and so Liz Truss, some people say she was a bit of a laughingstock, whatever. She was the Prime Minister.
Oh, was this when she was?
No, it was like 2 months after she was the Prime Minister. And so there was a former Prime Minister sitting in the audience, and I got an encore and a standing ovation at the end of the show. And the whole room was intelligent, right of centre people. Okay. And it's just the sort of people that used to listen to the Today programme and now no longer do. And I got an encore, and there was a form, and I talked to Julia, the head of commissioning at BBC Radio 4, and I was like, look, there's a Prime Minister in the audience. And she was like, oh my God, I've never been in an audience where there's been a Prime Minister in the audience before. How exciting, how exciting. And I thought, a Prime Minister in the, I mean, it was Liz Truss, but Prime Minister in the audience, an encore, a sold out room. If I can't get my Radio 4 pitch at least past the first hurdle. And then of course it didn't even get past the first hurdle. And I just think, I like Julia. This is Julia Mackenzie, the commissioning of Radio 4. But, she's got that left of centre worldview. But there is just so much risk to her if she were to commission somebody from the right, because the left will go, why are you commissioning him? He said, he's a racist, he's a fascist, and she'd just come under so much pressure that it's just easier to stay with that sort of little group of people that she uses. The other thing we haven't talked about is the influence that agents have on the commissioning process within television and radio. So, my friend Dominic English, she just used to go, you're never going to get commissioned. Why do you even bother wasting your time? And so it's very, very good, because you have, people, once they get their little slot at the National Theatre and they become the in-residence playwright, or they got their little slot on Radio 4 comedy, and then the person who's commissioned it can go, well, it had this guy from this show, and it had this writer from this show, and it had this producer from this show. I can't understand why it didn't work, because, they de-risked it because it had all these people. And so it's a self-reinforcing thing that the same people get used over and over again. And it's occupied by the left, and it's very hard to get other voices in there. Now, what I'm interested to see what happens with satire over the next 5 years is, all these guys were, the Tories caused the end of the world. Now Labour's going to save it. Labour's not going to save it. Where's the satire going to come from?
For sure.
Is satire from the right going to get a voice? On the BBC? It might do, but I think it'll, the BBC justifies its right-wing output by going, look, we've got Jeff Norcott. And he's like, Jeff's a Tory comic who's, and Jeff's great, but he's like the one guy who gets on. And there'll be like 10 programs, and one of them will have Jeff in for 5 minutes, and that's that box ticks.
And he plays I don't know, but he sort of plays the working class card a bit.
He's a working class tourist,
which is fine. But yeah, he's a working class tourist, so he's got that edge, that side to him where it's like, because you can kind of, it feels like the whole paradigm is so intrinsically left wing, right?
It is.
The rhetorical, grammatical grounds that one has to swim in to try and even address any of these problems are kind of sort of so left wing, basically, that you have to use certain types of language to even be allowed to open up a particular conversation. It always involves having to use the sort of language of the oppressed, so even if you're right wing, it has to be a sort of left wing, right wing or something, right? You couldn't just say, I'm an aristocrat, I believe in brilliance, I believe in excellence.
You have to make jokes about the fact that you've got a posh accent and your father's a landowner. You can't just go, I'm an aristocrat and I'm proud. I'm an aristocrat and I'm better than you.
You could do it as a character, couldn't you? But just to play devil's advocate a bit with that wonderful scene you were describing of you performing for Liz Truss and a sort of centre right audience, might the commissioning people at the BBC, might they be thinking, actually, Dominic isn't really doing the job of a sort of satirist and comedian here. He's kind of playing to the court, and this is the bad side of the private patronage model, is that he's giving this right of centre what they want to hear, and we're interested in a satire and a comedy that's about holding power to account, speaking truth to power. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's possible she thought that. It's possible.
Would you reject that model, or would you reject that is what you were doing?
Well, I was, let's take, we'll use my Brexit song as an example, 17 million F-offs. And that song was taking the piss out of the fact that the entire political and cultural establishment went against Brexit, and the British people just went, oh, fuck off. We're voting for it anyway. Mm-hmm. That was that song. And then they did, and it was a song about every attempt to undermine it. The British told you to fuck off, 17 million fuck offs. But she might look at that song and go, well, it's a pro-Brexit song. And it is a pro-Brexit song. Mm. But that it was a satire on the establishment trying to stop it happening.
Yeah.
And but like it did, like how much, like every single bit of comedy you hear on TV and radio was just anti-Brexit, leave voters are stupid, blah blah blah. That's you might think that, and that's a fine point of view to have, but that's not a reflection of the country. And it's because the paymasters thought that, so they put their people on, and the result is you don't get a balanced view. If there's no subsidy at all and the whole thing happens by market forces, you would have some people satirizing it from one side, some people satirizing it from another, some people making the argument that it's good, some people making the argument that it's bad, and you would have a more balanced point of view. And you can't have that while there's somebody with a certain political view determining what gets put on.
Yeah, it's probably worth saying, Dom, that you make these videos, because our listeners might not know this. You make these videos, small songs, and they're on Twitter or X and YouTube, and some of them have been massive. One of them, I think Elon Musk.
Yeah, Elon Musk tweeted my last one, we're all far right now.
Have you seen it?
Yeah, very funny.
And it got 49 million views. And the irony is that he tweeted that on the day that I got my no from Radio 4. And it got 49 million views. Like, how many people listen to Radio 4? 2 or 3, 4 million maybe? And, 49 million views is more people than there are in England.
Yeah, that song as well, it wouldn't have been that surprising like 15 years ago to hear that on Radio 4 at all, right? I think
like my
the reason, by the way, that Julia
would love that song.
I know they would. I just know the honest words. It might be that Julia rejected it because they don't want musical comedy on Radio 4. That's it might be something as prosaic as that. But there, I was just using myself as an example. But it's very, very hard to break into the closed shop. That is, and you finding it as actors, it's just very, like there's some guys who seem to get all the gigs, and it's because they got the last gig, they were decent in that one, and so they get the next one, and it's all about getting that first gig. But until you get that first gig, it's just very hard to break in. It's just a closed shop.
Yeah, it's tricky, isn't it? And it's hard to know what the reasons are why one doesn't or does get jobs sometimes in the arts. But so what is the problem here? Is that well, what is exactly the problem in terms of? I'm trying to think of it from perspective of like a young writer or an actor or a creator or a director who is trying to kind of get into the industry, wants to create work, has their own kind of ideas about story, drama, character, reality, politics, maybe, and they will. There's basically no way through for them now unless they are of a certain type of thinking or and say and kind of speak about or explore ideas that are acceptable within the kind of rule and the minds of the rulers, the cultural rulers here. So that's a huge
I don't think
isn't it?
there's no way through.
And how would they get through if there isn't? What's the way
Well,
through?
okay. If I was a young, like my instincts, as I say, come from a libertarian worldview where we stand on our own 2 feet.
Can you explain libertarianism a bit to us?
Well, libertarianism is basically you have as little tax, as little government, and as most possible individual responsibility as possible.
Right. Okay.
And it's you might call it anarchy. Anarchy believes in no government, and then you have minarchy, which believes in minimal government. But some people associate anarchy with chaos, but actually, it's kind of natural order to things.
What would the state? What would the small bit of tax pay for? The army, defence, education?
Yeah, well, the out and out what they call anarcho-capitalists, the ANCAPs, argue that even defence and infrastructure and things like that should be paid for privately and supplied privately because they'd be done cheaper and to a higher standard. So you would have no government at all. And it's the closest thing in the world we have to it. I mean, it's never, they always say real socialism has never been tried, but real anarcho-capitalism and real libertarianism and real anarchy has never been tried either. But the closest thing we have in the world to it at the moment is what Milei's trying to do in Argentina. And I'm really, really excited about what he's doing. And I just pray that he turns Argentina around, because once he does it, governments copy each other. Because it gets certain codes. A lot of these organizations are populated by people who have high career risk and don't want to take risks. And if somebody else does it, then they can go, well, he did it, so we're copying him. We saw it happen like mad with COVID. The response to COVID, every government just copied what the other country had done. And it just sort of, and the only country that had a sort of strong enough thing to go, no, we're not doing that, is Sweden. And so governments copy each other. So if what Milei does works, then other countries might start copying it as well.
Sorry, can I just tell you, if Milei fails, would you recognise that your ideas were flawed?
Never. There'll be
like some... a communist saying, like, just because they have it in Russia, just because they haven't done it, doesn't matter.
There'll be some reason. He will have been taken down by his opponents. I'll find some reason.
Your view is unfalsifiable.
Yeah, I'm afraid I'm pretty entrenched on all of that. I've written about 4 books about it, but at least I'm open about my own bias.
Humans are copiers, aren't they? It's like sort of political mimesis or like dramatic mimesis. Is like people, a bit like Ricky Gervais, right? The Office humour. It just people just got to do what they think works and what gets you.
Yeah,
up.
When I was starting out,
words they think are going to get them higher up in social.
Absolutely. And when I was starting out, every comic was just impersonating Eddie Izzard. And you look at London comics now, and they're all kind of Daniel Kitson impersonators.
Who's Daniel Kitson?
Daniel Kitson was a very, very, well, still is a very, very big comic. But he sort of is his own man, and he never did TV, and he just did his own live shows.
Sort of does like whimsical things about pigeons and things.
Yeah, he was. In his own way, he was a genius.
Okay, so libertarianism. Sorry to interrupt. Just so we can be clear on that. So that's that. So how would they get through this person?
Because I have this just own your own shit, take responsibility. If I was a budding young writer, I would be looking at ways to exploit social media and the new media on the internet, and I would be trying to produce good work. And as a result of producing good work, you start earning money, whether it's Substack or YouTube advertising or however you do, and you just build up a following, you build it that way. That's what I would be looking to do if I was a young creator. I wouldn't be trying to suck the teat of the National Theatre or the BBC or whatever it is. But that's just the route I would go. And I just think the opportunities, like, you get big on social media. You've got the American audience, which is just 5-6 times bigger than the British audience. And it's bigger than...
more money.
Yeah, they've got more money, and they've got more of a culture of giving and supporting and patronage and all the other of it. So that's what I'd be trying to do.
Do you find that model is working for you? I mean, are you able to monetize Still videos through X
My
and stuff like that?
my song videos are probably at break even. Every time now and then, I've done crowdfunds in the past and people have given me money. I was doing Comedy Unleashed last week in Manchester and somebody just came up to me and said, how do you pay for your videos? And I just said, I pay for them from my other work. And he said, can I give you some money? And he offered me quite a lot of money to keep on making the videos. So every now and then, you know, a godsend like that does come along.
This was someone in Edinburgh?
Manchester.
In Manchester, just came up to you?
Just a random in the audience, yeah.
In the audience?
Yeah.
Wow.
And so, you know, but like, okay, so I'll tell you this story. During the lockdown, I had done this lecture at the Edinburgh Festival all about the history of the Edinburgh Fringe and how it showed that the Edinburgh Fringe was the realisation of everything that Adam Smith, the old Scottish economist, argued for. And it was called Adam Smith, Father of the Fringe, because he was known as the father of capitalism. And I did this lecture, it went okay. And then during COVID, my friend Alex, who lives around the corner, who I'd made some song videos in the past, we were like, there is a genuine shortage of content at the moment on, you know, the broadcasters are struggling for content because nobody can make anything. If we can make something, we might have a genuine chance of breaking into the closed shop that is British TV. What can we do? And we thought about it and said, I've got this ready-made lecture that I did. I know it works because I did it live. And Alex said, we'll go up to Scotland and we'll make a documentary about the history of the Edinburgh Fringe in the year it didn't happen. Okay, so we went up and we shot the documentary in 3 days. And we weren't technically in a lockdown, but we were really bending the rules, but we made it 3 days, hour-long documentary. Then my manager started going, oh, well, this is really good. You should get some of your, you know, friends who are stars to come and be in it. And so I was like, okay, well, Jimmy Carr owed me a favour. So I phoned up Jimmy and got Jimmy to be in it. And Al Murray was in it and Henning Vane was in it. And Arthur Smith was in it. And Shazia Mirza was in it. But just to organise all those interviews, just ended up taking a couple of months. Jimmy had to go into quarantine because he'd just come back from Dubai doing gigs, whatever. So anyway, we had a sort of finalist show ready by about September, October. But we needed 20 grand to pay for the archive footage, to do the grading, to pay for some music, just to do all the final post-production. Maybe not 20 grand, but we just had that figure. And we had this meeting, and I had this meeting on Zoom with the head of radio, BBC Two, the head of BBC Four, and the head of documentaries. And they were going, yeah, well, we don't really understand the Edinburgh Fringe, and we've already got our allocation to the Edinburgh Fringe. And I was like, yeah, but it's the 75th anniversary next year, and what the point is, you've got your little allocation to the Fringe, you allocate more to Glastonbury, and the Fringe is 50 times bigger than Glastonbury. You just don't realise it. You know, the only event in the world that sells more tickets than the Fringe is the Olympic Games. It's an incredible thing. Like Edinburgh has 450,000 people, 4 million go through Edinburgh during the Fringe. It's just an incredible economic success story. I was saying all this to them, and I could see I persuaded them. Anyway, they didn't bite. And then about 2 months later, I know this because Henning was in it, they commissioned their own documentary about the history of the Edinburgh Fringe on the 75th anniversary of the Fringe. And like, we've all had ideas nicked, but I've never had anything that brazen. And it was just outrageous. And anyway, now we're in January. And it was a really, really cold Sunday evening in January. And I had been to visit family down in Devon, and I was driving back on the A303. And I stopped to get some petrol. And I just checked my messages. And this email came through. Hello, my name is such and such. I've just survived a near-death experience with COVID. I had really bad COVID, and I was told I had 12 hours to live. And I was really at death's door. And then I started watching some of your videos on YouTube, and they really made me laugh. And I just wanted to write and say thank you. I'm better now, but thank you for making me laugh when I was so close to death's door. And I was like, oh my God, it was really quite moving reading it. And then he said, and by the way, I'm a video games entrepreneur and I'm worth 150 million quid. And if there's anything I can do to help you, I'd be glad to help you. So I just said, well, as it happens, we've got this film and we need 20 grand to get the film finished and get it over the wire. And the money, it was a Sunday night, the money was in my account at 9 o'clock the following morning. Wow. And so the moral of that story is if you don't put stuff out there, nobody's going to know. So you have to keep putting the stuff out there and treat it as a lost leader and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
But it also shows how generous people are, and that's a patronage model. And we put the film up, and I'm really proud of it. It's a really good 1 hour documentary, and you should all watch it. It's on YouTube.
That's on YouTube.
What's it called?
Yeah.
Father of the Fringe, Adam Smith, Father of the Fringe.
Amazing.
And you can watch it, you can put it on YouTube and watch it on your telly. Can I just talk about this, something I want to talk about very quickly, generally to do with what subsidy has, it's the state that it's left theatre in.
Great.
Okay. So what we have in theatre at the moment is, firstly, and this is not a function of subsidy, it's a function of a broken property market. But it is very hard. Like, the theatres are owned by controlled by a select bunch of people. And so what you tend to have in the West End at the upper level is it's almost entirely musicals with some kind of existing brand recognition. Mm-hmm. So that will either be a jukebox musical, Queen the musical, Mamma Mia, whatever it is, Michael Jackson the musical, or Back to Future the musical. And I've seen some of them and they're really good. Mm. I mean, I saw Back to the Future the musical the other day, and I've never seen special effects in the theatre like it. It's not why you go to the theatre for special effects, but it was amazing. They flew the DeLorean over the whole audience. They flew a whole car. It was amazing. The songs are crap. You think you've spent all that money on the special effects. It gets better songs, but anyway. So you either have the jukebox musicals, or you have musicals where there is an existing brand awareness. So Mary Poppins or Oliver or The Sound of Music, or Dirty Dancing. Yeah, that's more of a jukebox one, but yeah, it's both. So, and if there is an original new musical on in the West End that hasn't got there without some kind of subsidy, I'd like to know what it is. So you have at the top end, and then just beneath that, you have the subsidised theatres, the RSC and the National Theatre, and they put on their own stuff. And I'm not saying with subsidy you can't produce good stuff, because the National Theatre has produced some amazing productions, even though it makes me really reluctant to admit it. It has produced some amazing stuff. It's also produced heaps of crap, and it's long since disappeared up its own backside. And you've got that theatre in London Bridge, the Nicholas Hytner Theatre, and he put on Guys and Dolls, but again, I know it was an original take on Guys and Dolls because it was done in a promenade style and all the rest of it, but ultimately it was still Guys and Dolls. It was something, it wasn't a new thing. So you have this sort of top tier of commercial theatre, of jukebox musical, and then you have the subsidised theatres. And what's happened is there is an appetite for theatre in this country. People want to go to the theatre. But those two things, the subsidised theatre, and it's very difficult. If, like, my dad found this, he wrote the most successful comedy in the history of the West End and spent the last 25 years of his life trying to get his stuff on, and nobody ever wanted to put it on. Because there was the National Theatre didn't want to do his stuff, and there was literally nowhere else for him to go. There was what's his name, David Pugh and Daffyd Rogers used to put on stuff, but it was so tiny in the grand context of things. It's very difficult. Comedies you can occasionally get on if there's a big star in them, but it's just very, very hard, and it's because the subsidised theatre. And people go, well, it's on at the National Theatre. Let's go to the National Theatre. It'll be good. It's on at the National Theatre, and it drains all the capital. And then there's the perennial issue of premises, which is a function of the broader housing market. And it just means you have this sort of subsidised tier and the jukebox tier. And then there's a huge leap right down to the bottom, to the fringe, to the rooms above the pubs.
Yeah.
And even there now, starting to rely on subsidy to get stuff on. And it's just, there's this sort of huge gap that cannot be bridged until they stop subsidising stuff. And that would be like, you write a play and you put it on for a 6-week run at some theatre. It's just really, really hard to do that.
And this subsidies, they come from tax, right? They come from people's
I think
tax.
Arts Council, lottery money, a lot of it comes from lottery money.
It comes from lottery money as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so lottery money, tax. and people, I think,
and private, there's corporate donors as well.
Corporate donors, so they
But
give money
the
to
corporate,
these...
the big corporation will want to help the National Theatre because it thinks, oh, it's the National Theatre. We want to be helping. We're not going to help some random. But the National Theatre is only the National Theatre because of the subsidy. So it just drains
everything.
So what these bodies are getting money from tax, lottery, maybe some private.
Plenty of private money as well.
But these are bodies giving it out to whoever needs it based upon the type of things they want to give it to.
But if it's like, BP, for example, or Shell will be told you have a certain amount of your money each year you can give to the arts.
Yeah.
So BP, Shell, and then somebody will go, oh, we don't want BP because they deal in fossil fuels. But the person who decides where the money at BP goes is just another button pusher in a corporation. It's not the guy. It's not the guy at the very top who wants to see this thing.
But isn't it just the same as a patron giving money to these bodies then?
Yes, it is. There's crossover. It is similar. But what I'm saying is, because the National Theatre only exists because of subsidy, and the BBC, BBC is a very, even now, it's still a very powerful brand, but it was made what it is because of subsidy. It's very hard to come along and go, I want to start a TV channel and compete with the BBC because it's got such deep pockets. Now, the BBC can't take money from BP and Shell. But if it could, because it's got a no advertising thing or no sponsor, but if it could, a lot of those big corporations would be glad to sponsor programs on the BBC because of the BBC, because it's a respected brand. But it means that money then goes to the BBC, which is a state-funded thing, rather than going to you two.
Mm-hmm.
So my question, this is kind of to both of you actually, is what is the point of theatre and what is the point of drama?
To hold the mirror up to nature.
Yeah, that's the great answer, isn't it? I thought
Very
that's
good.
from Hamlet's
advice to the players.
Speech to the players. Yeah, so to hold a mirror up to nature, right? So if that's probably a fair
to
thing.
Show scorn her own image.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
What's that from?
Same speech.
Yeah. If we this is a fair thing to say to people, isn't it? Right, it should hold the mirror up to nature and what as wholly as possible, or at least not as biased as it is, right? So, for instance, this is what kind of always irritated me was when you had the Brexit vote, which is fine, 52% voted Brexit. Why is no one in drama or theatre having the decent kind of inclination to say we're going to try and dramatise a perspective from that side of things? And but there was nothing, and there never has been. And I suppose that just feels so dishonest. And
it is dishonest,
indecent.
But the commissioner. Okay, so you're the commissioner at the National Theatre, and you're in that bubble, that worldview bubble. Oh, I'm going to put on a thing that argues that actually people who voted Brexit might not have been really thick and stupid, and actually, they didn't just vote because of what they saw on the side of a bus, and actually they may have had a point.
Yeah,
that play's not going to get on. No chance.
I know, but it feels so unfair. I remember there was one girl I met who was writing a play about her dad, who was a Brexit voter, and it was sort of a sympathetic kind of look on it. Ultimately, he was stupid.
That's the only way to do it.
It's like he's been let down by something or another, and he's ended up having to make this decision. So it can only ever be. This is what I mean about it's so the stranglehold of the sort of left ideology is so kind of pervasive that it's kind of inescapable. One can even feel oneself kind of talking in their language at times, and even as we've been having these discussions, I've felt us kind of walking over because me and Ollie with this company away, what we don't want to do is just kind of get knee deep in culture war stuff all the time. We want to kind of go past. We want to kind of analyze what culture might be, what is history, what are these great kind of ideas and writers we've left behind. But I can feel as we've been having this discussion, we've been kind of walking over bits of what's the right metaphor, like eggshells or glass. But I don't mind that. I'm okay with that. But it is interesting, isn't it? Just even having like an honest discussion where you're like, well, this is what's happening. You can feel yourself like hovering over a target that if you hover over, they'll fire their AA missile gun, what they call the anti-aircraft stuff, at you, because you're like you're hovering over some target here, aren't you? And we're getting into this. But it sort of it baffles. The one thing I noticed, right, was that when I was filming, when it was the Brexit stuff, all the drivers, they all vote Brexit. Right? So all the drivers are like working class geezers, and they would have their tabloids in the front, and they'd be really lovely men, most of them, and they would say they would be arguing with actors, and all the actors would be telling them how stupid they were for not voting. I remember being like that myself. I was a bit like thinking I knew better for whatever kind of arrogant bohemian reason I did, but Yeah, there's just no representation of it. There's no mirror up to nature. There's no sense of like, or Thatcher was interesting. Maybe I if someone really loves Thatcher or something, or who'd be a really controversial figure, to right wing figure to.
Farage.
For a pro Farage player would be interesting, but even if we get historically, like Nietzsche, Nietzsche's not
I feel
necessarily
like
right.
he's accepted enough that, I mean, there've been quite a few plays about Nietzsche that are quite sympathetic.
Okay.
He wouldn't be so. I mean, well, Hitler, obviously. I mean, you could go on and on.
The misunderstood.
Yeah, I mean, with Churchill, sort of, you can be sort of pro Churchill if you're doing it from some sort of soppy progressive perspective, like the film when it was Churchill's like shaking everyone's hands on the tube, and he's not really that guy, Churchill, is he?
Yeah,
I mean, I don't know Churchill, but I mean, I've read some of his stuff, and it's a fascinating character, but it doesn't feel. He doesn't feel like a modern progressive, that's for sure. But if you could,
and he was unashamedly, he didn't apologise, he didn't pander. He was a bright man, and he didn't sort of talk down to people. He maintained his high standards.
Have you read his book, The History of the English-Speaking Peoples? There's a bit, and I've started it because 4 copies. Just got it as a bit of like illegal contraband. But in there he says this thing about like basically killing people. Like, you should kill people who welcome foreigners to your country. You should kill not the foreigners. You should kill the people who are doing it. And it's like it's a passage. Someone referenced it on GB News recently. Actually, I saw like some Palestine argument. There was a kind of.
Was he being ironic?
No, it's not ironic at all. It's like he just writes it at the bottom of one of the pages, and it's like he just basically. I'll find it if you're not sending it to you. But it's and then some.
But I bet that view was much more acceptable in the context in which he was writing.
Yeah, it's effectively like if you're welcoming foreigners and you're doing it kind of all the time, you should be killed for it.
Wow,
not even them.
Well, I mean, like we still put on George Bernard Shaw, who said very regularly. I guarantee there will be more. They'll put on Major Barbara and those kind of plays, as they should, because they're great plays. But Shaw very publicly said everybody should have a test to prove their usefulness to society every year, and the people who don't pass the test, get shot.
Really?
And,
he was a lefty, sure.
No, you're doing it from a left-wing perspective.
Yeah, okay.
It was probably more the aristocracy who were useless that he'd want to shoot. And H.G. Wells, who we still put on War of the Worlds all the time, he said things like, the white European race is superior, and he said, as for the rest, the world is not a charity.
It is
so all these people
European
have said,
history,
they'll all get cancelled.
But this is the thing with European history. It is complicated. Those are the critiques over the last few years. They are good. They're good critiques. Like Churchill was, by lots of ways, we probably consider him a racist. The founding fathers of America did have slaves. Loads of these critiques are devastating. Like, European art and high art was kind of created at a time when Europeans were exploiting other parts of the world, I don't. It's really hard to disentangle these problems, and this is why these kind of cultural critiques at the moment are so hard to kind of get out of, because they're not necessarily untrue. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, but again, I still think as soon as you're in subsidy, and then the subsidizer has to justify the decision to subsidise this sort of thing, and he has to go back to his pay, the whole thing gets politicised. The politicisation of everything is as a result of the state getting involved in everything. And if we had a much smaller state that just left people to get on with it, one guy can go and put on his Churchill story because he thinks that Churchill may have had a point, and the other guy can go and put on his Churchill story because he thinks that Churchill's evil, and the market can decide, and the market exactly.
But then you've also got to take into account, if you say people vote with their feet as if they've got an equal playing ground in advertising, right? Kind of how you can't.
Yeah, they don't know, but they don't. You're absolutely right, and a lot of the time, the person with the deeper pockets and the bigger advertising budget will win. Most of the time, they will, but not always. But it's still. You still, the market works, and there's a natural order, and ultimately people will want to go and see the best stories.
Yeah, I do agree
and it will have a much healthier outcome for theatre more generally, and for the arts more generally, if there was no state involvement, and the relationship was between creator and audience.
So I sort of flip between, I'm hearing what you're saying, and I kind of flip between despair and optimism sometimes, because I'm like, inspired by what you're saying of, there's actually more opportunities to break through, there are more kind of gaps, and in some ways the system is crumbling with the cancellation we've seen, also with the cuts that are coming, even under Starmer, I'm sure.
They're going to have to. There is not the money to pay for what they want.
So I just want to pivot there. So, like, how's it looking now with a Starmer government?
I'm not an expert on how subsidy for the arts works, okay, but I do know that they've tried to get as much subsidy as possible through things like the lottery, which is, much more, there's less government involvement in the lottery. The lottery collects the money and then it distributes the money. There's through things like that than direct subsidy from the government. And I know that, for example, if the government cut the subsidy to the National Theatre and then Ian McKellen went on a march dressed as Gandalf and everyone goes, "Oh, you're robbing Gandalf. How could you?" It's from the point of view of government, it's only going to make it's like Marcus Rashford and school fees. Like, why would you bother trying to take on Marcus Rashford on school dinners? You cannot win that fight because he's Marcus Rashford. You're just not going to win that. So why, so that's what will happen. And so by putting it to other bodies like the lottery, they sort of divorce themselves from it. But, there's a lot of people in the Labour government who have made a lot of promises and they think they're going to spend money on this and spend money on this and spend money on this. And I've written extensively about the new taxes that Labour's going to have to bring in. But even when you actually look at the numbers that the tax money is going to bring in, they just don't add up. So all the things that Labour wants to spend money on, unless we suddenly have a period of extraordinary growth, which is possible because a lot of people are investing in British tech at the moment. More people are investing in British tech than investing in Chinese tech at the moment, which is quite interesting. So we might get a period of growth or something, but at the moment, the money coming in versus the spending pledges does not weigh up, and the arts usually suffers a little bit.
So in some ways, that's quite positive because it's
the sooner it all stops, the better.
Yeah.
The other thing which would, I don't wish it, but a collapse in the property market would be a very it's not good if you own property, but it would be very good if, there was suddenly a load of cheap theatres on the market that people could buy, or there was a massive deregulation. One of the reasons it costs so much to build anything is not the cost of the actual building; it's all the regulation, whether it's the cost of the land or the building regulation when you build something, because it has to meet certain standards. But if that cost came down, it's all cost of government. But if that cost could come down, so it would be easier to get a license for a theatre and build a theatre somewhere. Really, a theatre is not that hard to build. You could just stick a warehouse and stick some seats in a warehouse and you've got a theatre. It's not that hard, but, the planning regulations make reality rather different. But if there was a property collapse or a sudden deregulation that drove down the cost of building, and so, suddenly, you can buy a 4-bed timber-framed house on the internet for 50 grand, for less than 50 grand. 4-bed, like 2,000 square foot family house, timber-framed, 50 grand. And the problem is where you put it. There isn't the land to put it. But so, you could erect a theatre for 50 or 100 grand if you cut corners and you're a bit creative and all that, which I know 100 grand is a lot of money, but it's also not an impossible amount to get hold of with a bit of clever crowdfunding and a bit of, sucking the right dick. And do you know what I mean? It's possible. And that would make theatres. And then if you can build a theatre or take hold of a theatre for not that much money, then and ticket prices don't need to be that high, and so people can come and see it. And you have why is there no Wetherspoons for theatres?
Well, that should be the
the idea only just occurred to me now. But why not? Why not have Wetherspoons for theatres?
What do you mean by that?
£2.50 a pint tickets, the equivalent of
yes.
cheap and cheerful, cheap mass-produced stuff.
Yeah.
There's no reason why it couldn't happen, and so I think pubs have probably more of appeal than theatres do. But you take my point.
But how would you, if everyone's paying cheap prices for tickets, you wouldn't be able to pay your actors, because if you've got 100 seats for £2.50 each, that's 200 quid.
I accept that, but like now it's like to go to see a West End musical now can cost you like 150 quid a ticket.
No, I know it's so.
And so if you want to take you and your 4 kids.
But we even find it like a challenge trying to budget our we do the play readings. We had you in one. We're trying to budget, like hiring somewhere, paying all these actors even for a day. It's really the maths of it are really complicated, and you end up realizing that people cannot do this without subsidy at the moment, or someone helping
Yeah.
them, because
Yeah.
the economy is there, and you don't really just want to create like elite theatre where, you know, you've got kind of people paying 150 quid a ticket, because you do want to kind of have a mix and plurality of audience.
I agree. But the biggest expense of all is the theatre, is the building
Yes.
itself. And if you can cut the cost of that, then you can cut the cost of your ticket.
And
Building-
you're saying that's connected to building regulations.
It's connected to planning laws, building regulations, artificially suppressed interest rates, asset price inflation. It's just connected to all that crap.
Oh,
Fascinating. I feel like
we're done.
that's a decent space to kind of wrap things up. Do you feel
But
there's any more?
I don't think theatre dies. In fact, my ambition for the second half of this year is I've got ideas for 2 different musicals that I want to write. Lord, no, I haven't even considered how I get them on. Edinburgh is one place, but even Edinburgh's destroying itself because of it's the cost of premises was killing it. But you know, it's really hard because the subsidised theatre drains all the capital. But there are still opportunities if you go into it with a bit of imagination and a bit of determination and all the rest of it.
yes. Thank you very much, Dom. Can you tell us where people follow you and all that stuff?
Yeah, my comedy mailing list is frisbys.news, FRISBYS.news. Please join my comedy mailing list. And if you want to read me about economics stuff, theflyingfrisbee.com. I have a Substack, and I put out 2 articles a week on there.
And they can find you on social media as well. With
At
your
Dominic
videos.
Frisby on Twitter.
Okay.
I am on Instagram, but the fake Dominic Frisby has more followers than the real Dominic Frisby on Instagram.
And YouTube? Do you have a YouTube?
I do. Dominic Frisby comedy videos.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
We are the Bass Creates. Thank you very much for listening. Please follow us on Instagram and X and YouTube, and download and subscribe and follow and all that sort of stuff wherever you get your podcasts. We are a production company, a theatre production company, and we'll have readings on soon. We have a writing competition called the Agon, and we are encouraging new fearless writers to send in their plays to us. We're looking for 10 to 12 page extracts and a synopsis, and we will have a live competition, and we're looking to develop new writers. So please get in touch if that's something you want to be involved with. And just generally get in touch if you'd like to talk to us. If you're an actor, a writer, director, or anyone, or an intellectual, an academic, we're trying to tie all these people together. So please follow what we're doing and get in touch with us. And yeah, that's all.
It's really good what you're doing. And what you just described there is you're just building up a network.
Yeah.
And networks are very powerful things.